Welcome to the Timco Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. In this video, we're going to be setting up an administrative control over which users are in which roles. Now, Patreon members, don't forget to head over to my Patreon site to get the source code. If you aren't a Patreon member and are interested in getting the source code for each Timco Retail Manager video, including the past videos, head on over and sign up at the $5 per month level or higher. Now, if you've been following this course since the start, you know the goal is to develop a .NET framework application that can serve as an existing application so you can learn how to upgrade to .NET Core. Think of it as a real-world experience that you're going to need in the marketplace today, tomorrow, and for months and even probably years to come, is a skill to move from .NET Framework to .NET Core. Now, the schedule is set, and as long as nothing unexpected comes up, this is the last video in this series before the big upgrade. That tentatively schedules the upgrade for November 4th. I'm planning a few surprises and giveaways for the event, so you don't want to miss it. I may even be on live when it launches. We'll see. I'll be out on the West Coast at a conference during that time. Now make sure you're subscribed to this channel to get alerted when new videos are launched. Also, there'll be extra bonuses for mailing list members and Patreon members. The links to both of those are in the description. Okay, let's head on over to Visual Studio. Now, before we jump into things here, one of the suggestions that came up from a couple different viewers that I really like is I've been struggling with this whole idea of everything's named TRM something. In fact, TRM and a D. So data manager, data manager.library, desktop UI, and desktop UI.library. So it gets confusing which is which and what is what. So one of the things we can do that doesn't affect anything in our projects, but it makes it more visually easy to understand, is we can add folders at the solution level. So let's do that. Let's start by right-clicking and adding a new folder, and we'll call this our database. And we'll drag in the TRM data. And now we're going to add another folder. And this one's going to be called API. And we will drag in our data manager and our data manager library. And then finally, we'll create one more. And we'll say WPF. And we'll drag in these two. Now, these names don't have to be precise. They don't have to be perfect. What they're here for is to make it easier to understand what the different groupings are. And so I chose things that make sense to me, the database, the API, and the WPF. You may want to say front end instead of WPF, but maybe front end has more than one user interface. Maybe there's a web user interface as well, and that might be confusing. So it's up to you if you want to do it this way or a different way. It doesn't really matter. What matters is this makes it a little easier to understand. They're grouped this way. Okay, so great suggestion. Thank you for those of you who suggested it. I appreciate it. I definitely think it makes this application better. Now, if you're watching this and you have other suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. Like you just saw, I read those comments, I think about them, and if it makes sense for what we're trying to accomplish, I really do try to implement those suggestions. So keep those suggestions coming. Leave them in the comments below. Okay, now what we're going to do today is we're going to add a couple of endpoints to our API. So right now in our user controller, we have the get by ID for user, and we have the new one we just added, which was get all users. Okay, so let's do a quick overview. Let's just start it up and do a quick overview so you can kind of get a feel for where we're at. Now, for you, it may have been just 2 weeks since the last video, but for me, it's been about a month and a half since I worked on the Timco Retail Manager. And the reason why is because I went on vacation, and so I pre-recorded a couple of videos ahead of time so that I was prepared and able to go on vacation, not have to record videos while on vacation. Makes sense, right? But what that does is it makes it a little more difficult for me to kind of get back in the groove of where things are at. And maybe that's you too. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick review of where we're at, just so that I understand and kind of get back in the groove of things, and also to kind of illustrate what you would do if you're coming back into an application you haven't worked on in a while. So let's review real quick what we have, and maybe we'll even see some things with some fresh eyes. So for example, this login form, I haven't logged in yet, but notice we have the users drop down here. That doesn't make sense to have that. In fact, I'm unauthorized, and so it closes it back out. But now what do? I'm kind of locked out of everything. I have to actually stop it. So we're going to have to fix that, and we'll write that down in our bug sheet for something to address. But once we log in here, we have our sales page, which we've been doing for a while. We have the ability to add to cart, add multiple, and it just adds this. We have a tax and the total, and the ability to check out and remove from cart works as well. So that all works. And we just recently added this users page. So users is for user management. We can only open this if we're an administrator. And what this does is it shows us all the users and what groups they're a part of. So for example, myself, because I'm the only user in this system right now, I am an administrator and I'm also a cashier. So those are the two groups or roles I'm a part of. So that's what it's showing us right now. This is what we're going to modify today. Because it's great to see which roles a person is in, but as we add new people, they're not going to have any roles, which means they can't even do the cashier work. And so what we need to do is have the ability to allow them to be a cashier. Now, the other thing I notice right now is that in my menu, I have exit, user management, and log out. I don't have a way to get back to that sales page. That's something else to add to our list of things to look at or address. All right, but for today, we're just going to focus in on adding and removing these roles from users. So let's start by closing this out, and let's look at our API real quick. So we'll go to /swagger, and let's look at the users, which we have just those two options: get all users, or this user, which we pass in and get back the full user information based upon who's logged in. So it gives us all the information. And this one, this gives us a list of the roles as well as the user ID and email for each person. So those are the only two we have under user. We're going to add more today. So we have get by ID, and we have get all users. Let's add a new entry here. And what we're going to do is we're going to add the ability. Notice here we have a list of roles. What I think we need to do is have another endpoint that just returns a list of all the roles. So let's do that. Let's create another endpoint. Let's copy everything through a signature line and come down here and paste it. And we're going to say get all roles. And instead of a list of application user model, the way we did it in this model, the application user model, we returned a dictionary of type string string, because we have an ID and the name. That's all we have for a role. So I think that's fine to return the same exact thing, a dictionary of string string, and say get all roles. And this will allow us to say, okay, you're in 2 roles, but how many roles are there? Well, there's 3 roles. So you can see all 3 roles and then know, okay, you're missing 1. All right, so that's basically the reason why we have to have this get all roles. And the get all roles is this right here. So you can say, we can actually grab this. But roles is going to be, context, which we don't have here. We have to have our using statement. Let's move that inside. There we go. We had to have our context in order to get our roles. But the roles is a list of identity role. That's not what I want to return. So I need to convert this over to a dictionary. And right now I'm doing a to-list here, but I think we can wipe this out, and there's a more elegant way of doing this. To dictionary. And then what we need to do is we need to specify what the ID and the value is, a key and the value is. So the key, we could say x equals, or lambda expression, we'll say x dot ID, and then x lambda expression x dot name. And what that'll do is it'll convert roles is now a dictionary of type string string, which means we can actually just return roles. Now, yes, we could have just put a return statement instead of this. The downside of doing that is for debugging purposes, it's a little harder to see what those values are before they are exported or returned. And so this way it makes it a little easier. We see this value. Now, yes, that does create a new object, and there may be a little bit of performance hit for doing that. So you have to think through, is performance a huge deal right now? It's not a major thing, but it is something to think through. Maybe you just do a return statement. Okay, so it's possible that's better for your situation, but I think that it's not going to cause us a performance issue enough to be noticeable in any way. So therefore, this is easier for debugging. Therefore, I'll leave it this way. So what does this toDictionary do? Well, what it's doing is it's taking in two functions. Notice a function here and a function here. And what we're doing here is we're creating this function that says this is the output. So a function has an input, which is identity role, and the last value in a function is the output type. So the input is identity role. That means it's pulling one role from this list. So the input is identity role, and the output is string. So saying whatever's coming out has to be a string. And so we say, okay, the input is X. So we grab that and then use it and say, I want the ID property of this identity role. I'm going to export that as the return value. And that converts that return value to a string if it's not already. But in this case, it already is a string. And we do it twice, once for ID and once for name. Now you may wonder, well, why do we reuse X, and how is that? Isn't that a problem? No, because X is only valid inside this context, and then it gets destroyed. So you can use that same variable more than once, because it's not the same variable, it's a new variable with the same name. We could say, instead of X, we could say key and value, but with lambda expressions, usually I use one letter things for these short ones. It's up to you, okay? But what we're doing here is we're converting this IDB set of type identity role. We're converting that to a dictionary and saying just pull the ID and name values from each entry and use that for our key value pairs. All right, so that's our roles. And now we have a get all roles, which also is only authorized for administrators to pull from or to read. Now I think we need probably two more methods. One method is going to add a role to a user, and the other method is going to remove a role from a user. So it would seem like we'd need the same signature or same setup, pretty close. Only it's going to be a void. We don't need to return anything here. And instead of get all roles, we're going to say add role. and we'll make this a post. So add a role. And we'll do another one that is remove a role. So let's copy and paste this and say remove role. And again, remove role, remove a role. And let's look at what it would take. So we're going to need to have I believe the user manager. So let's copy down through here. We'll need to add a closing curly brace. So, oh, it already did for us. Nope, it did not. It looked like it did, but what it did is it actually moved the closing curly brace from our method. It moved that to say that's a closing curly brace for our using statement, and then we don't have one for our method. So now we have the user manager. I believe we can say user manager dot add role or add to role. And then we have to pass in a user ID, which is a string, and a role. User ID and a role. So how do we get those? Well, we're going to pass them in. And the return value from that is an identity result. We're going to leave that alone. We're not going to actually capture that. And what will happen is if this fails, it will return an exception, and that's fine. Let's copy this code, and we'll paste it down here. But instead of add to role, I believe it is remove from role, like so. And it looks like a user ID and a role, which we have to pass in, like so. Now here's the thing, since we are passing these in as an HTTP post, we really need to pass in one object, not two different objects. If we made it as an HTTP GET, we could pass in two different objects, but they would be URL parameters. And we probably don't want to have our user IDs going across as URL parameters. What that would do is it would expose them to be cached in firewalls and other things, and so then we'd be showing off, here's our user IDs. And that's just, well, it's not super secret, the user ID. At the same time, it's not something you want to just advertise, here is our user IDs. So let's create a model for this. So we're going to add a new class. And pairing.role, role name. And we'll do the same thing up here, like so, and we're good to go. Okay, so now in theory we have our API endpoints written to get all the roles available to us, and then to add a user to a role and to remove a user from a role. So now we can move over to the WPF side and start working with these endpoints. I'm going to leave this open for now, but I will minimize some of the stuff to give ourselves some real estate back. Let's go to WPF and the user interface, and let's look at, actually not the user interface yet, the library. We have API, we have user endpoint, and the user endpoint we have get all. So let's copy this, the entire thing, and let's get all roles. Paste it in as a type dictionary string string. And if that all works, we should get back a dictionary of type string string that is our key value pairs for our roles. So that's step 1. Now let's add another couple of endpoints. One will be for, let's paste in a, oops. I thought I still had this copied. So let's copy it. And let's come down here and paste again. And in this case, what we're going to do is say it's a public task, but that's it. It's asking for, if you notice here, it's asking for HTTP content. I don't want to do that. Instead, I'm going to use post as JSON async. If I do that and we look here, come back here, and it says any type T, which is really helpful because I can then post an anonymous object. So for example, I can say var data equals new anonymous object and then pass in the user ID and role name, like so. And I believe that's what we're looking for over here. We're looking for user ID and role name. Excellent. So by passing in the actual values here, what it will do is it will create a property in our new anonymous object and set the value to the value of this value. So it's going to create a user ID and then property and put the value of user ID into user ID. So it's the equivalent of saying user ID equals user ID. You can do that. It's just kind of redundant. So therefore, now I can take data and I can I think what I'm going to do is say equals false, and then I'll throw my exception. Otherwise, I let the method end as it is, and it returns essentially or closes out. I think that's fine. So with that, I can then copy this and do it one more time for remove. So remove user from role. Everything else is the same here, except it's going to be remove role. instead of add role. And now that should be valid as well. So now we have our methods on the WPF side in the class library to call for adding a user to a role, removing a user from a role, and getting all of the available roles. So with that, I think we have everything we need. So we can redo our iUser endpoint, which right now this interface has one object. And there's a few ways you can go about this. We could delete this and recreate it, but that's not going to be really helpful. I don't think I can overwrite it. Yeah, it says I can't overwrite it. So I could generate the one and then just copy and paste things over, but that seems a little hacky to me. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to open a new horizontal tab group, and I'm going to go to my interface here, and then down here, I will just start copying the various items. So I'm going to copy this one and put a semicolon at the end, and then I'll copy down view. It's only 46%, but it has the users and it has the user drop down or a list box. And that's all in column 0. I think what we need is a column 1 where we see the various parts for a selected user. So when we select a user, it should put the user's name, and then it should have, all right, here's the current roles they're in, a list, and then it will have, and here's a drop down where you can add new roles to that user. And we have a button maybe that says remove roles from user. So let's do that. Let's create a column 1. We'll actually just copy this comment here. Three. So it's going to span the this row and this row. Let's just do 2 for now. And we'll find out if we need more later. Okay, the first item we're going to have is a text block, and that's being named the selected user. I actually selected a user name. We could also do a binding here instead and do a dot. So you do selected user dot name if you want to do that. But I think we'll just do selected user name. And I think that's all we need to do. To format that the same exact way as this one, that's all we need to do. So there. here. In fact, it'll probably look almost identical to this list box, except for the fact that we're going to not have this complicated setup here. We're just going to have a list of strings, all it's going to be. So I don't think we need to have this item templates thing. So let's just create a list box. What this will be is a list of the roles that a user is currently in. So X name equals selected user roles. I think that's it for the list box. We'll see in a little bit if we need to add more things, but I think that's probably good. We might need to have this is a min height and a min width. We don't need to do a min height, I don't believe, but a min width might not be a bad idea. I'm trying to think through if we really need that or not. Let's go with no. We're going to ignore that for now, and we'll see if we need it. No reason to add something we don't know we're going to need. But I think we do need to have a margin at the bottom. So left, top, right, and bottom. And actually, we might need to have, let's cut this out for a minute. I'm going to put another stack panel in here. With an orientation of horizontal. Inside there, I'll paste this, and I will cut out my margin, and I will put it here instead. And the reason I'm doing this is because I actually want a button next to this list box with a name of remove selected role. And let's do a content equals remove. Like so. And that's going to be right next to our list box, which right now our list box has no width. Therefore, it's on the same line. Okay, so now we have that. Then we can put another stack panel with an orientation of horizontal. And this will be for a combo box with a name of available rows, or available roles. And then for our combo box, we'll have, I think that'll probably be it for now. And then we'll have our button with a name that's going to be add selected role. And the content equals add role. Like so. So now we have a combo box, or a drop down, you might call it, where it has all the available roles we can add to a user. And then a button next to it that says, hey, let's add that to the role. Now let's put a little bit of space here. If you notice, kind of hard to see, but there's not any space at all. It's touching. So let's put up some margin here. So on the left, I want a margin of 5, then all zeros. I'll do the same thing for my button up here, for the remove button, to give the same spacing next to the list box. All right, I think that's all we need to do on the front end. So now what I've done is I've recorded each of these different things that we need. A selected username, selected user roles, remove selected user role or selected role, add selected role, and available roles. Those 5 things we need to have in our view model in order to get this wired up. We also need to look at, do we have in our list box any way to indicate what this selected item is? And I don't think we do. I don't see it here. So selected item, and we give this a name. So selected item, we're going to call it selected user. So make sure I make note of that as well, that we're capturing selected user. And a selected user should be of type, it should have type whatever users is. So let's look at our view model for user display. And users is a user model. Therefore, we should have a property that's, oops, not prop, I want prop full. That's of type user model. And this is selected user, not user, selected user. Not user model. There we go. So this will be what we need. We do need to modify our set to indicate to everyone that the value has changed. So I'll do that here. And notify a property change for the selected user whenever you do a set. That should be what we need to populate all of our values except for the roles list. So now let's create another property. We'll start small and just do our selected user name. So I did prop again instead of prop full. And this is going to be a string. And this is going to be selected user name. Like so. And what it's going to return is every time we get a change on the selected user, we're going to update selected user name. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this easy on ourselves. Whenever we change this, then we're going to say selected user name equals value dot and the username, which will be our we expect them to. So let's start this up. And we'll drag in our WPF form. I'll click the login button. I'll wait for it to load up. And then under users, this is ugly right now, but if I select tim@iamtimcorey.com, it populates this value. And that's what we were expecting or hoping for. Now I could set the visible property for this overall stack panel to be if the selected user is null, then don't show anything. That would probably be appropriate, but I'm not going to worry about that at this point. So now let's populate the current roles list. So what we need is we need to look and say we have the selected user roles. That's a list of string. So prop full Let's go ahead and initialize our private backing field. And now what we do is whenever this list changes, we will trigger that event. However, we should probably make this not a binding list instead of a list. So a binding list is, or observable collection, but binding list will work like so. And now whenever we add something to the list or remove it, then we'll have the values be updated. So now we need to actually modify this so we actually fill it in whenever we change the selected user. But we can't forget to add the notify property change first. Okay, so whenever the user changes, the selected user changes, we need to trigger this selected user roles to change as well. So the first thing we'll do, we're putting some logic in here. I'm not a huge fan of putting logic in properties. I'm debating, and for right now I'm going to leave the logic here. But I think what I'll do in the future is move this off into an initialize method that gets triggered based upon this property being changed. But for right now, I'm just going to put it in the property set value. When you're not totally sure of which direction things are going to go, it's sometimes better to put the code in, get it working, and then refactor, instead of trying to refactor in your head before anything actually happens. Because what happens is you say, well, the best practice is this, therefore this is the way to go. And you go down a path that might not be the best for your particular application. So I'd rather refactor after the code is in, not try and refactor before we even get code in. So I'm going to put a little bit of code here. What it's going to do is it's going to add first it's going to clear the selected user roles. Because if there's already something in here, we don't want to keep those roles. We want to clear those out. And then we're going to say selected user roles dot add. Actually, I'm going to reverse this. I'm going to say value dot and look at the role list or the roles. And I believe role list is the one we want. I'll make sure by looking at what we see for the value.roles, not role list, roles. That's not what I want. Instead, what I want, I believe, is what we're going to do is use the select. So we're going to say select, we'll say x arrow function x dot value, just the value of the key value pair. And that should return an IEnumerable of type string. I'm going to cut that out, and I'm going to say selected user roles equals new, and then pass in an iList, which is an IEnumerable, should be fine. Or nope, it's not. So to list. That should work. So what's going to do is I can get rid of this clear now. What this will do is it's going to create a new binding list, and it's going to create that binding list off a list of string, which I'm going to get from this roles.select. So roles is a key value pair, a dictionary, and we just want the value, which is the name of the role. And the reason why just the name is because that's all we need for adding or removing a role. We just pass in the role name, not actually the ID of the role. At least I'm pretty sure that's what it's asking for. I'm going to look back real quick to make sure that I'm not mistaken there. But if we come here and look at the pairings here and it asks for remove from role, it says the role, which is a string. And if we do the Control Shift space here, for role, it just says remove a user from a role. It doesn't say a role ID. It says user ID, but then it's role, not role ID. So I believe that's all it is, the role name. So with that, we should have our list of the roles the user is currently in. Let's test just this out now. Hit login, go to users, and select a user, and notice admin and cashier. Those are both the roles that I have assigned to my account. And remove spans this entire thing. That's fine. All right, so now what we can do is we can move on to the rest of the roles, which is called available roles. So let's do something very similar. So let's copy and paste this. And this is available roles. Available roles, but to stop this, I forgot to stop it. The reason I forgot to stop it is because I closed the DPF application, but the API is still running, and so therefore that keeps the entire application running. All right, so available roles. Notice how this is a renaming nightmare. So that's why I encourage you not to rename things or not to copy and paste things. But sometimes I do it and break the rules. Okay, now we have available roles, and it's the same thing, but there's a slight tweak here. And that is now that we have the list of what items a user has, then we know what they don't have. So to figure that out by saying, okay, if it's already existing in this selected user roles, then don't put it into the available roles. And I definitely think this gets its own method. So let's come down here and create a method. And we'll put it even down here by our other methods. It doesn't really matter where you put these things, but I try and keep some type of order to it. Right now I've got my properties up top, and then I have my constructor, and then I have my overload, and then the just normal methods. So private async task, and this is going to be load roles. And what this will do is it's going to get all the roles that are available and then only add the ones that are missing. So var roles equals await underscore user endpoint dot get all roles. And then we're going to do a for each role in roles. And each role is going to be a key value pair from a dictionary. So we'll say is if, and then we're going to look at our selected user roles. If selected user roles index of, and then we'll look for our role dot value is less than 0. So the index of is going to return a 0-based index of the first occurrence of that item. If it doesn't find one, it returns -1. So if it doesn't find something, then what we'll do is say available roles dot add role dot value. And that should load the available roles for that user. So now with load roles, we can come up to probably up here. I'm not real thrilled I'm making changes here, but at the same time, I think this works for now. And I've got a problem because I'm trying to call an asynchronous method synchronously, and that's a problem. So it's not awaited. The execution will continue before the call is complete. All right, so I need to await this. The problem is if I await this, I'm not sure I can do that inside of a property. I can only use inside of an async method. So that's no good. And the other thing here is if I load the roles, I'm not convinced that it's going to trigger the notify a property change properly on the proper thread if I change it asynchronously. Let's find out what's going to happen. I don't think it's going to be the solution I want, to just call this without awaiting it. Let's find out. I'll log in, go to user management, select this, and there is manager in this role. That's interesting. So it did work. I'm not real thrilled with it. So I've got a list now of things that I'm not real happy with in this application. I need a tweak, whether it's the menu and a couple different things there, especially with hiding things and then going back to the sales page, and then calling the asynchronous method without awaiting it, and what that does. Not terribly thrilled, okay? But I'm going to, because this video is going already at about 50 minutes, I want to leave it as is and put this for a let's fix some stuff video later on. I still want to get these two buttons wired up, the remove and the add. So let's wire these up. And I'm not going to do the can remove and can add. I'm going to leave that alone for now. But I'm going to say public void, and then the name of my buttons is add selected role. I'm going to paste that in, add selected role. And then I have another one, oops, not stopped yet. Another one that is public void remove selected role. So add selected role is going to take the selected role, which I don't even have captured here. I don't know which one is selected yet. I need to figure that out. So let's go over here, and in our list box, selected user role, this is to remove. So selected item equals selected role to remove. And I'll copy that for later and paste it in my notepad. I've got a running notepad of all the different things I have to add or modify. Okay, so selected item is selected role to remove, and then this combo box is going to be selected role to add. And I will paste that in as well. And it's not selected item. Interesting. It is selected item. Not sure why it's yelling at me, so let's take a peek at it now. It's not closed. I copied an extra closing angle bracket. Whenever this goes squirrely up here, check your code. It's probably you, not the designer that broke. Okay, so now we can create those properties to hold the different values. Let's minimize some of these things here. Wow, we're getting a lot of them here. But what we'll do now is we will say prop full like so, because we're calling the API. So we're going to first say the what's our API call? That is user endpoint. User endpoint dot add user to role. And we're going to pass in the user ID, which is selected user dot ID, and the role name is the one list and add it to the other. So the one list is called selected user roles dot add selected role to add. And then we're also going to have available roles dot remove selected role to add. So that'll add it to the roles that the user has access to, and it'll remove it from the available roles. We're going to do the same thing in reverse, essentially, for this next one. So instead of add user to role, we're going to remove user from role. And instead of selected role to add, selected role to remove. And we're going to swap these as well. We're going to add it to the available roles first, and then we're going to remove it from the selected user roles. Okay, let's try this out. What do I think the odds are of it working the first time? I say it's fair odds. Not great, but fair. We'll log in. We'll go to user management. We'll select Tim. And we're going to say Tim is not a manager yet, so let's add Tim to the manager role. And it has not done anything yet. It feels like it's done nothing. So I'm wondering if that's a problem. Looks like maybe we haven't wired up our methods correctly. Well, I think the first issue here is that these are actually they're events. And events have a return type of void, even though they're asynchronous. There's a one type that has a void return type. Let's see if that works. I'm going to actually put a breakpoint right afterwards for both of them. Let's start it up and see if we get a little further. I believe we will. So we're going to log in. We'll go to users, select the user, select cashier, and say remove. And that worked. So it triggered this. We get to the selected user ID. That's cool. Selected role is null. That's not right. So let's find out why the selected role to remove is null. Let's go up here and selected role to remove. Selected role to remove. The value of the string is null. That's not correct. That shouldn't be correct. Let's come over here and look at, we're saying selected item. What are our options here? Selected item, selected value. Let's try selected value and see if that makes a difference. That was to add. Whoops. Let's do the same thing over here. Selected role to remove. Let's try that again. The breakpoints are still in place. It's a little trial and error here as I debug why it's not working. So selected role to remove is still null. Role to add is null, but of course I didn't actually do anything here. So I did a little bit of research into Caliburn Micro because I think it's a Caliburn Micro issue. I'm not blaming them because it's still my issue, but I think